relationship to a youth group who may make this title to be more interesting to them, such as Secrets to Relationship, as youth learn about relationship in their time. Next, to provide training program. An example is the United Malaysian Dhamma Ferris Dhamma Speakers. Indeed help Dr. Chan Kai-in and other speakers to unfairly reach their potentials. Through their mentor-mentee system and providing the potentials platform to speak, for example, Dr. Chan Kai-in, she has benefited from this course, and her journey as a Dhamma speaker was recorded in Little Steps, Joyful Steps. Her CD, Dewdrops of My Heart, includes some of her 28 insightful Dhamma talks in English. She has also written 2 other books, Paw Prints on My Heart, A Kite in the Wind. And her persistency, diligence, and creativity has inspired others. She is now a regular and active Dhamma speaker and started the animal care group. She said, "The example isn't another way to teach. It's the only way to teach." And she has produced all this just within 2 years. It's also important to supply creative methods, convenient materials, and teaching aids for the new teachers and for those teachers who have been teaching. Teachers recommend that text, content, and exam-based teaching is not so effective, and at times they have run out of ideas on how the teaching of Dhamma more interesting. So there are some organizations and individuals have made effort to provide creative methods, convenient materials, and teaching aids so they can make the Dhamma fun and enriching with their head, heart, and hands on. Indeed, Dhamma is fun and enriching. For Ruby, the director of Nalanda, successful teaching involved the parents, facilitators, and students. The 3 groups learn, practice, and share together. So for her, be a model, leader, coach, facilitator, counselor, and friend, and not a teacher. The future of Buddhism, according to her, lies in Buddhist education, adaptation, and bringing forth the highest potential within. This model of Dhamma education sets example for other organizations to groom potential leaders. Yes, we must give priority to educational fund for female Buddhist teachers' development. Here in this slide, if you can see, if a cat can stand and pray, what more? The investment for human potential. Conclusion. Malaysia is relatively new, and the good work of the charismatic immigrant teachers have led the local to continue to promote peace and wisdom through the teaching of the Buddha. Buddhist women teachers shoulder many responsibilities, displaying capability and endurance with zeal and effort. They have done a great job spreading Buddhism from temples to communities. These teachers inspire others by embodying the Buddha's virtues. The continued growth of Buddhism depends on nurturing the potential of all human beings, Theravada or Mahayana, lay or ordained, to bring forth the teaching of the Buddha and work for the well-being of the world. If one has the conviction, being one never a handicap, an inspired individual never fails to inspire others. Last but not least, I would like to dedicate this paper to my teacher, Venerable Mahinda, my family members and friends, and all the daughters of the Buddha here. And my appreciation to all who have encouraged, supported, and sponsored me to be here with you and to share with you. And also, I'd like to share the merits of this occasion with all beings. And may all be well and happy, and may they walk the Dhamma's path and one day attain the high bliss of Nibbana. After the session, the Buddha opened the door of the moon for us. Help others to open theirs too. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Sister. Thank you very much, Sister Sumangala. Now, our next presentation is by my good friend, Li Yuzhen. She will speak on Bhikshuni Sho, Enlightening Society by Institutionalizing Buddhist Education. And Li Yuzhen is an associate professor in the Department of Chinese Literature at National Tsinghua University in Taiwan. Her research interests include gender issues in religious studies, Buddhist literature, and Chinese religious novels, and she's written many books and many articles. We can't even have time to talk about them. So please welcome Professor Li Yuzhan. Thank you.
Venerable and friends, good morning. My topic is Bikuni Xuwen, Enlightening Society by Institutionalizing Buddhist Education. It's start on page 182. Bikuni Xuwen entered the public consciousness in the spring of 1990. Newspapers in Taiwan celebrated the birth of Huafan University, the first Buddhist university in Chinese history that she established. Buddhist newspapers went further and designated her as the most influential female religious leader after Bikuni Zheng Yan, the founder of Tzu Chi Foundation. Bikuni Xuwen was honored for her lifelong contribution to promote Buddhist education at the 7th Sagatita International Conference held at Huafan University in 2002, witnessed by over 300 Buddhist nuns and lay women from 24 countries. Xuwen, a professional emeritus of Buddhist arts at the Chinese Cultural University and the president of Lotus Ashram of Buddhist women, died in October 10, 2002, at the age of 92. Regarded among Buddhist leaders in China, Hong Kong, Malaysia, and Taiwan as the preeminent heir of the Jianlan school and the Buddhist Tiantai lineage, Xuwen produced many famous Chan paintings and wrote numerous books on subjects that ranged from Buddhist philosophy and Tiantai meditation to what she terms enlightening education. She was one of a very small number of Buddhist pioneers who were instrumental in transforming Buddhist educational ideas into general college education. She affects this important change through her publications, her teachings at the various Buddhist institutions, and her founding of Huafan University in 1991. Xuwen was born in Guangzhou in the political pivotal year of 1912. As a young girl, before starting her education in the Confucian classics at age 5, she followed her grandma in chanting the Buddhist sutras. Initially, the Sino-Japan War, which began in 1937, does not seem to have affected her life. In 1940, she transferred to a Christian girl high school, where having been recognized for her distinguished achievement as an artist, she became known as the heroine of the Lingnan School of Paintings. During 1941, she first started her great travels. She originally intended to spend only several weeks visiting Guizhou to paint landscapes. After she left Hong Kong in September, however, the Japanese military suddenly took over Hong Kong and in October closed the border. She therefore continued her travels until 1945. Journeying through southeastern China to escape the war, she traveled alone, visiting famous Buddhist temples and their avars, such as the Chan master Xu Yun, and supported herself by selling the paintings she made during the journey. For a woman to travel alone like this was so extraordinary for her time that she became a legendary figure. Because of her established fame as an artist, her paintings were very popular and usually sold for comparatively high prices. However, she donated most of the income to local schools. At the end of her travels, she learned that her 2 sisters and father had been killed in the war. Now to the page 185. I believe that Xuwen had a very different concept of modern Buddhist education than her contemporary Buddhist fellows, due to her personal experience in Christian schools. Her educational background would have been considered privileged by most Chinese at the beginning of the 20th century. During her time, most eminent monks received their education in traditional monastic discipline, which naturally influenced their interpretations of educational reform. The case study of the four famous monks in the 20th centuries, such as Taixu, Yingguang, Hongyi, and Xu Yun, exemplifies this. All these four eminent monks promoted traditional Buddhist education and limited their modernizing movement to within the walls of monasteries. These male leaders tried very hard to establish Buddhist institutes and lay societies, rather than conventional public schools. It is not strange at that time. Many temples had been confiscated by local gentry and governments for building Western-style schools. As for lay education, Taixu only went so far as to suggest that monks wrote novels to attract the younger generations. In other words, these monks recognized the necessity of modernizing Buddhist education in the monastic community, but did not move beyond that to a systematic presentation of Buddhism as part of lay education curriculum. Huan's approach was different from that of her male counterparts in many ways. First, instead of being trained in a Buddhist temple, she received a Confucian education at home and a modern Christian education at a school. Indeed, she did not become a Buddhist nun until the age of 37. Secondly, initially her educational programs were primarily intended for youngsters at general public schools. From her perspective, religion is capable of and should play an important role in general education. This approach echoes both Confucian and Christian educational philosophy. Finally and significantly, Huan had always supported herself as a teacher before she became a nun. It seems that she was determined to lead an independent, celibate, and intellectual life, an unusual career path for women of her time. To some extent, her rejection of monastic roles such as abbess, ordination masters, and a temple proprietor kept her from fully living a traditional monastic life. Indeed, she never gave up teaching and lived in a faculty housing most of her life, even after she became a nun. Now, page 186. The legend of Huan attracted Taiwanese Buddhist nuns to support her educational program. In the process, the students of the Lotus Ashram have created a close and efficient network. Even though she was the primary instructor at the Lotus Ashram, Huan usually identified herself as a gardener rather than a proprietor. She expanded the traditional content of Buddhist teaching. In addition to meditation and Vinaya, students were required to learn Chan painting, classical Chinese, editing, and news publication, and were encouraged to attend advanced classes at the Chinese Cultural University where she taught. So Huan offered higher education for her students of the Lotus Ashram. On the other hand, she also treated them as regular students rather than as disciples. This approach help avoid conflicts between the students and the temples that send them to study there. Senior members of these temples had no worries that their young nuns would shift their loyalties. At the same time, junior nuns appreciated the opportunity to study at a college. After graduation, these students and the members of their home temples tended to become followers and supporters of Huan. In this paper, I have examined Huan's success as a female religious leader who established the first Buddhist university in Taiwan. Because of her reach out to the general public through art and writings, her influence extended far beyond the monastic community. Her philosophy of a modern education that incorporated Buddhist teachings influenced by her own educational background created a new idea for nuns as professional scholars and educators, as well as a new standard for Buddhist education. Her independence, insight, and creativity inspired young nuns to offer their practical skills in fundraising to fulfill her dreams. In this process, Huon and these nuns all receive much more than a standard academic education. Their efforts and ideas influence not only the world of Buddhist education, but also a new generation of public school education in Taiwan. Thank you.
Thank you, Yujun. Now our next speaker is Venerable Jumpa Chudrin, and she will speak on Buddhism and Buddhology, One Root, Two Fruits. And you can find her paper on page 188. 188.
Thank you very much.
Let's see, and I'm trying to find the 255. Oh, okay. And just a brief, the biography of I have to find. Oh, yes. Uh-huh. Well, she's sitting next to you, Jenna. Yeah? It's okay? Yes, okay. Yes? Yes, that's the right order, yeah. Okay. Okay. We have to wait for a moment. But Venerable Jumpa Chudrin was born in 1959. She became a novice nun in 1981. And she attained full ordination in 1985. She received a PhD in Tibetology and Classic Indology with an emphasis on Buddhism at the University of Hamburg. She currently teaches Buddhist philosophy at the Tibetan Center in Hamburg and lectures and publishes, especially on nuns' ordination and women in Buddhism. So let's welcome Venerable Chanpa. Thank you.
Well, Buddhism is not only a... Can you understand me? Yeah. Buddhism is not only a living religion with millions of followers worldwide, but also subject of scientific research. From the Western point of view, a tension exists between the traditional study and practice of Buddhism on the one side and Buddhist studies as an academic discipline based on scientific research on the other. The two worlds are quite different, but can be mutually enriching. I see a great opportunity for Buddhist women to come forward and help to establish an international standard of Buddhist studies that combines traditional education with modern ways of learning to best serve society. I will use my own biography as an example of the inherent tensions between the two approaches to considering the subject of Buddhism. In 1997, I asked my teacher, the late Venerable Geshe Thupten Ngawang, whether he would consider it a good idea for me to do an academic degree in Tibetology and Buddhology at Hamburg University. I expected that he might advise me not to engage in studies at a secular university, but he actually encouraged me to do so. His only concern was whether my status as a Buddhist nun would be a disadvantage. By contrast, during the acceptance process at the university, a member of the examining body asked me whether I did not fear a conflict when science and religious belief diverge. But that was not my concern. Buddhism is not a naive belief, but is based on knowledge and explicitly encourages questioning and verification. In the Bodh Gaya interviews, edited by Cabezon, His Holiness the Dalai Lama even says that Buddhists should not reject scientific findings, such as that the earth is a sphere, even if the Abhidhamma Kosha describes the structure of the world differently. When I was ordained in 1981, there were no study programs for nuns in Tibetan Buddhism. Meanwhile, educational opportunities for nuns have improved, though equality in education for nuns with monks has not yet been reached. Academic studies following the Anglo-American model with bachelor and master degrees courses are still not very common among Tibetan monastics. For about 600 years, monastic universities were only open to monks. Comparable institutes for Tibetan nuns have only been founded in Indian exile during the last 20 years. Final degrees in monastic education comparable to those for monks are still pending. However, women can study at the Central Institute of Higher Tibetan Studies in Sarnath, which is affiliated with the Sanskrit University in Varanasi and grants Shastri and Acharya degrees, which are comparable to BA and MA degrees. PhD studies are possible too. The institute is cooperating with Smith College in Massachusetts and Tasmania University in Australia. A few nuns, such as Venerable Bhikshu Nikama Lekshit Somo, have been accepted at the Institute of Buddhist Dialectics in Dharamsala, which now collaborates with Emory University in Atlanta. But generally speaking, these academic courses are initiatives designed for Tibetans. There are no standard degree programs for the training of Western nuns and Western Dharma teachers. For example, at the age of 22, I began Tibetan language studies and traditional training in Buddhist philosophy and debate at the Tibetan Center Hamburg. From 1987-88 onwards, I served as a translator and tutor in the 7-year systematic study program in Buddhism offered at the center. In 1996-97, I took up studies in Tibetology and Indology in the field Buddhism at Hamburg University and completed a doctorate this year. What is the difference between traditional and academic studies of Buddhism? The texts to be tackled are the same, only the manner of dealing with them is different. Buddhology, being a branch of Indology, deals especially with Indian Buddhism and texts in Pali and Sanskrit. When reading canonical texts, Tibetan and Chinese translations are often consulted too. In Tibetology, indigenous texts are the main objects of study, which means works that are not translations from Sanskrit, but have been composed in Tibetan by Tibetans. These texts may be commentaries on Indian classics, but also include texts on Buddhist history, biographies of eminent teachers, and other works. Due to the typical methodology of science using scientific methods, a different system of evaluating and weighing the authority of the text is used. While Buddhists find it important to direct our mind again and again to central themes such as death and impermanence, going for refuge, ethical behavior, shunyata, and so on, scientists are interested in bringing forth new topics for research, gaining new insights by using scientific methods, recording the results, and publishing them. In this Western scientific process, the status and interpretation of what Buddhism is and what is important in the field of research is constantly changing with each step of expansion of the scholarly expansion. His Holiness the Dalai Lama has repeatedly stressed that Tibetan lamas transmitting Buddhism to the West should concentrate on the essence of the doctrine. From a scientific viewpoint, it is debatable whether a core of Buddhist teaching really exists. Because of the diversity of Buddhist texts and teachings, one can hardly express something about Buddhism as a whole that is true for all living traditions. But though perhaps for the various Tibetan traditions, we may be able to identify a core. For scientists, of course, diversity is no problem. Other things count. For scientists, it is quite exciting when ancient manuscripts appear. I skip the example and go to the next paragraph. Buddhist practitioners, on the other hand, when reading texts, have a different focus. For the Buddhist, levels of experience are perceived as the teachings passed on from teacher to disciple, from generation to generation. Ideally, the oral tradition contains a special quality, the transmission of the teaching from a person's own direct realization. This form of authority through an experiential connection to the tradition is vital and essential, and it must not be lost. By contrast, university studies do not involve learning the practices associated with a text. The practice of meditation can be an object of research, but it is subjective. Experimental quality is not of much interest to the scientific community. Buddhists go on pilgrimages, circumambulate sacred objects, develop bodhicitta, take vows, etc. If one wants to investigate such phenomena scientifically, one needs to have a broad understanding of the current state of research, the gaps exist, and successfully demonstrate how knowledge on a specific issue can be extended or enriched. Excursions and field trips in the reference countries and discussions with Buddhists can be useful in this regard, but the researcher's inquiry usually does not parallel the practitioner's interest and motivations. As the International Congress on Buddhist Women's Role in the Sangha at Hamburg University in 2007 demonstrated, dialogue between scholars and practitioners can be a valuable and insightful experience on both sides. Scholars of Buddhism can discuss the historical and current development of the ordination of nuns from a historical perspective, even though researchers are generally theorists whose work is not involved with the internal decisions in the Buddhist order. Buddhist practitioners can understand the historical method as another approach to the critical inquiry encouraged by the Buddha and a useful tool both for evaluating Buddhist sources in their historical, social, cultural and political context and for addressing issues on contemporary relevance from a Buddhist perspective. For example, in ancient India, women were always put under the protection of men. Thus, with increasing institutionalization, the order of nuns was subordinated to the order of monks. How are such regulations to be dealt with these days in a world that highly esteems gender equity? Comparative cultural, historical, and religious scientific studies may be helpful. This also applies to other issues, such as the biographies of Buddhist masters. What is a legend and what is a reliable source of information? How, under what conditions and why were certain texts composed? When is an author polemical or sectarian? From an academic viewpoint, it is not a contradiction to be a Buddhist and Buddhologist at the same time. What is controversial, however, is whether within Buddhist studies we want to strive for a course in Buddhist theology or Buddhology that is similar to Christian theology. When Buddhist practitioners take up Buddhism as an academic discipline, they simultaneously become insiders and outsiders. As outsiders, they must examine Buddhism in a historical critical way using a methodology that is not part of their traditional religious training, a method that was previously unknown in Buddhist cultures. Otherwise, scientific research is not possible. Many scientists disqualify theologians from being true scientists, reproaching them for being bound by their creed and therefore biased when undertaking research. Thus, it is often believed that theological studies are misplaced at state universities. Others argue that during the founding of universities, theology had a central role. At least in Europe, many publicly funded universities have theological faculties. In contrast to other faculties, churches participate in decision-making on staff and content-related issues in these faculties. In Germany, on the basis of the constitution that enshrines freedom of religion, the state can involve the religious communities but cannot regulate their contents. From a Buddhist perspective, it would be desirable that people in positions of responsibility in research, policy making, business ethics and so on follow ethical principles. Since the 20th century, questions about ethical boundaries increasingly arise not only in science but in relation to weapons of mass destruction, genetic engineering and stem cell research. The pursuit of objective statements is a scientific ideal. It should make no difference whether scientists are Buddhists, Muslims, Christians, skeptics or atheists, as long as they maintain a certain distance from their object of research. Problems arise only when, for example, scholars of religious studies dismiss other views for ideological reasons and no longer strive for knowledge, but only search for ways to legitimize their own ideology. John McCransky from the Department of Theology at Boston College advocates Buddhist theology within the framework of critical constructive reflection on Buddhism. He proposes to support Buddhist communities in their process of adaptation to the Western world and to show how critical findings can be used in a constructive way. A purely critical approach, however, may lead toward the deconstruction of Buddhism, and for Buddhists, the doctrine may lose its religious potential. I skip the example and go to the next paragraph. It is important to understand how religious thought and activities influence cultural and social developments in the course of history. If religious practices change in new cultural contexts, the authenticity of the doctrine is not necessarily in question. Instead, it is an indication that a living tradition is being expressed and shaped as it is experienced in different environments. At Boston University, it is possible to do a PhD dissertation on non-Christian critical constructive theology. A similar approach is pursued by the Academy of World Religions that is being planned at the University of Hamburg. The basic idea is to intensify research on world religions, particularly Judaism, Islam, Alevism, and Buddhism, within the context of Western societies. Questions of interreligious dialogue as underlying dimension, as well as its subsequent reference to the field of social issues, will be matters for discussion in order to contribute practical knowledge for living together in a multicultural society. Science is largely supported by public funds. Therefore, and also from the viewpoint of the humanities and social sciences, it is important to benefit society. This is certainly a common overarching objective of scientists and religious practitioners. Since many Buddhist study programs for women in Asia have only started during the last few decades, they can be adapted to the needs of modern society right from the beginning. There have been and still are many eminent Buddhist women, Asian and Western lay and monastics who serve as deans, professors, researchers and lecturers at universities worldwide. It seems that at least in Tibetan Buddhism, there are more nuns than monks who hold a PhD in Buddhist studies. Perhaps this happened because nuns did not have equal access to Buddhist studies within the traditional system. Thanks to this unfortunate circumstance, now many Buddhist women are ready to serve and help maintain the Buddha Dharma in accordance with contemporary needs. The time seems to be ripe for even more eminent Buddhist women scholars to come forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now our last but not least is my good friend, Dr. Christy Zhang. She will present a paper on Buddhist women beyond borders. And you can see her paper on page 219. And Christy is an assistant professor in the Department of Foreign Languages and Translation at National Taiwan University. She received her doctorate in linguistics from the University of Hawaii with research on cross-cultural language learning. She is currently resident director of the Council on International Educational Exchange in Taiwan. So let's welcome Christy Zhang.
Namo Ajidavat. Before I start, I would like to take this opportunity to thank all our very hardworking volunteer translators out there, our Vietnamese, Korean, Chinese translators. They are all volunteers. Thank you very much. Well, in this paper, I would like to introduce Bhikkhuni Hugh Wan, Xiaoyun Fa Shi, and Bhikkhuni Sui Miao, Rui Miao Fa Shi, the same nun that Sister Malia introduced the other day. These two eminent Buddhist nun teachers who went beyond borders, each in a very different sense. Each left her homeland, Guangdong and Fujian, China respectively, and traveled extensively, touching many hearts and leaving a transnational legacy. Bhikkhuni Hugh Wan taught in Hong Kong, India, and Taiwan, traveled all over the world, and eventually established Huafan University in Taiwan, the very first Buddhist university in the Chinese history. Bhikkhuni Sui Miao taught in the Philippines, the United States, Taiwan, and China, and was the very first Chinese bhikkhuni to teach Dharma in Manila and Hawaii. Both taught individuals from many parts of the world. Bhikkhuni Hugh Wan and Bhikkhuni Sui Miao were not just two wonderful role models for all Buddhist women in their own right, but they were also eminent to me personally. both challenged me, a language-obsessed linguist, to reconsider the place of language in communications as well as the nature of language itself. The first task is to define two words, eminent and borders. What role do eminent Buddhist women serve? One meaning of the term eminent in the Merriam-Webster online dictionary is, quote, exhibiting eminence, especially in standing above others in some quality or position, end quote. Another core meaning is, quote, standing out so as to be readily perceived or noted, end quote. Eminent Buddhist women stand out and catch our attention in various ways, most of the times in ways or norms that we identify with or that we ourselves hope to live up. They become role models for us to follow. There are also times, however, that some eminent Buddhist women catch our eyes or ears, in my case, because they have gone beyond our expectations. That is, they have gone beyond what we originally or normally consider possible. They have gone beyond the borders of our ordinary thoughts, beliefs, or biases. They inspire us to think outside of our own box and to re-evaluate our own stance. They liberate us from various fixed and false views. Like most of my fellow Buddhist friends in the Taiwanese community, I used to believe that language is irreplaceable in communications and conferences. Many Taiwanese Buddhist friends hesitate to attend international conferences because they think they cannot speak or understand English well enough. Even though I understood the verbal communications are not the only means of communication, it was not until I heard Bhikkhuni Hui Wan speak that I really began to understand how someone could communicate so seemingly eloquently beyond accents, words, and rhetoric. I refer to Bhikkhuni Hui Wan's way of speaking as seemingly eloquent because I simply did not understand a word she said, whether she spoke in English or Mandarin Chinese. My first and only personal encounter with Bhikkhuni Hui Wan was back in June 2002 during the 7th Sakyadhita International Conference on Buddhist Women at Huafan University in Taiwan, and the encounter was an unforgettable language shock to me. Bhikkhuni Hui Wan, then 92 years old, suddenly appeared in the conference hall on the second day of the week-long conference, in the company of her nurse and disciples to welcome all the participants. As I barely remember, she gave her remarks in both Mandarin Chinese and English. Again, I say barely remember because I have to admit I could hardly understand what she said. As the conference coordinator sitting in the back of the hall, I could only pick up a few fragments and some cues from her disciple, Bhikkhuni Ren Lang, one of the super nuns, if you remember, who was repeating and or translating consecutively for her teacher. What remains most prominent in my memory of that day is a warm and heart-opening atmosphere around Bhikkhuni Hui Wan. There was an understanding and communication that simply and powerfully went beyond words, accents, and rhetoric. I must admit that I felt a little bit frustrated because I really could not comprehend Bhikkhuni Hui Wan verbally. I also began to wonder whether the audience at the conference hall that day really understood her. Or like myself, did they also understand her through Bhikkhuni Ren Lang's translation? What about Bhikkhuni Hui Wan's disciples, students, and followers? Were they able to follow her verbal teachings with no problem? A native speaker of Cantonese, Venerable Hui Wan spoke both English and Mandarin Chinese with quite a strong Cantonese accent. She recognized this herself, raising the matter openly in a series of recorded interviews that were published in 1991 by Yuan Quan Publishing Company. From a sociolinguistic perspective, Bhikkhuni Hui Wan could be classified as a so-called disadvantaged speaker, since she spoke Mandarin Chinese with a strong Cantonese accent in the Taiwanese speech community, and used her very limited English to communicate complex and profound Buddhist philosophy with her international students and audience. Nevertheless, Bhikkhuni Hui-Wan managed to teach successfully in accented English, and many people came to study with her at the Lotus Ashram at Yangmingshan, including not only Mandarin and Taiwanese speakers, but also many Caucasians and overseas Chinese. In her own way, Bhikkhuni Hui-Wan managed to communicate complex ideas about Buddhist education and philosophy to the varied audience. In addition, she attracted sufficient support to establish the very first Chinese Buddhist university to be built in Taiwan. How did Bhikkhuni Hui-Wan manage to do all these? How did she make herself understood regardless of language limitations? How did she get her message across in her strongly accented language? When expressing profound Buddhist ideas, even though as is widely recognized, accents often get in the way of even the most ordinary daily communications. Did Bhikkhuni Hui-Wan apply some special rhetorical devices in her way of communication? Or did she perhaps possess something beyond ordinary language and professional linguistic skills? With these questions in mind, 4 years ago, I conducted a pilot study analyzing Bhikkhuni Hui-Wan's speech, available on a limited number of tapes and CDs, interviewing her disciples and students, and reviewing her published writings. In an initial analysis that I presented earlier in Taipei in 2007, I concluded that Bhikkhuni Hui-Wan possessed 3 special traits in her way of communication. First, she is a disadvantaged but absolutely thoughtful and considerate speaker, in that she will constantly speak in a language that was not to her own advantage, but to her listeners' advantage. Second, she is a flexible and versatile teacher, in that she draws and paints to complement her speech. And third, she is a mindful and reflective communicator, in that she takes the context of communication into consideration and reflects frequently upon them in her own writing. I also found Bhikkhuni Hui-Wan to be very outspoken, inspiring, and most important of all, extremely genuine and intuitive. Apparently, not all Bhikkhuni Hui-Wan's disciples, students, and acquaintances understood her completely. As a matter of fact, most of those I interviewed admitted that they did not understand her verbally, but they all remember her heart-to-heart style of communication. Bhikkhuni Karma Lekshe Tsomo, Venerable Tsomo, recollected, quote, "In some ways, Shifu was an elusive figure. Her interpretation of the Buddha Dharma was so profound that after hearing a talk, when I tried to recall the salient points of the teaching, the answer was always to practice Dharma genuinely and sincerely, such that every action was the opportunity for prajna awareness." End quotes. Indeed, Bhikkhuni Hui-Wan's way of communicating may be best categorized as going beyond words. As a matter of fact, she preferred to teach with actions rather than words, and her motto was, "Do not try to say anything. Let your actions speak for you." End quote. With this in mind, it was not surprising to hear many of her disciples and students refer to her teachings literally as wordless body teaching or voiceless demonstrations. It was also not surprising to hear one of her lay disciples confess to me that she never really understood what Bhikkhuni Hui-Wan said. And she never even bothered to listen to the translators either. She just enjoyed the presence of her, and she simply learned by watching. So looking back, I recognize that Bhikkhuni Hui-Wan was actually not the first linguistically disadvantaged Dharma teacher that I have come across. Much earlier, I had encountered another heavily accented Bhikkhuni Sui Miao, who was also the very first Bhikkhuni I ever met. Before I noticed her accent, however, Bhikkhuni Sui Miao successfully surpassed all religious teachers and priests I had ever met and argued against. She became the teacher with whom I took refuge in the Triple Gen. In 1995, facing a graduate student studying abroad at the University of Hawaii and majoring in linguistics, Bhikshuni Sui Miao did not start by giving any profound Dharma talks. Instead, she asked, "Your family does not live here? Do you have a place to stay?" And then she took me on a short tour in the newly expanded Yukfu Temple and showed me a room where I can stay anytime I liked, right next to hers. This short tour was followed by even more practical questions and invitations, such as, "Is it okay for you to take vegetarian food? Stay for lunch with us, okay?" Back then, I detected no accent in her speech when she asked these questions. Looking back, I realized it must have been because she was speaking the universal language of compassion, a language that is warm, plain, sensible, straight from the heart, and straight to the heart. She was welcoming and ready to open up and share everything. This is not just a language without an accent, but it's also a language that no one feels the need to escape from. As my personal story of encountering Bhikshuni Sui Miao continues, you will understand what I mean that when I say there's no one who could escape her. In addition to her very heavy Hokkien accent in both Chinese and English, people noticed that she always mixed unknown words, most likely from Tagalog, the Filipino language. The very same day I first met Bhikshuni Sui Miao, after a delicious vegetarian lunch, she asked, "You watch cartoon? Let's watch it together, okay?" And after watching a series of Japanese animated portrayals of the historical Buddha's life and an introduction to the Pure Land Sutra in 3 videotapes, she asked me whether I would like to watch a videotape talk entitled "Buddhism is not a religion, the scientific perspective of Buddhist teachings." This tape talk, presented by a senior monk, explained the basic concept of karma and clarified some of the frequently confused ideas about the Buddha's teachings and Chinese folk religion. At the end of the video session, around 4 p.m., she asked whether I would like to stay for another 30 minutes and join her and another nun for their evening service, 晚课. Having no reason to say no, I stayed and experienced the most beautiful and peaceful chanting for the first time in my life. Just as I began to feel curious about their life in the monastery, Bhikshuni Sui Miao invited me to join the 8-precept retreat to be held in the following weekend. She told me that retreat would be a way to experience monastic life for 1 day and 1 night. So I joyfully accepted her invitation. One thing naturally leads to another. Another surprisingly natural consequence was that at the end of the retreat, I quickly and quietly accepted Bhikshuni Sui Miao's proposal to join the ritual of going for the refuge. This was a bit surprising because in the past, even since I was a child of 5, I had a inglorious or even notorious record of endless questioning and challenging everyone who tried to convert me, including Protestant, Catholic, Taoist, and Mormon missionaries or priests. Despite their diligent efforts and kind hearts, I could never be persuaded. Yet, this time, almost as an aside, I was naturally inclined to go for refuge, along with a few other retreat participants. As Bhikshuni Sui Miao effectively explained to me, taking refuge was simply a meaningful way to learn from the Buddha and be a student of the Buddha. No more escape. Later, I had many chances to learn more about Bhikshuni Sui Miao through stories told by disciples and members at Yukfu Temple in Honolulu. At this temple, which Bhikshuni Sui Miao established and where she served as an abbess, members of many different nationalities speaking different languages and different varieties of world Englishes and Chinese languages. Gradually, I realized that the story of my encounter with Bhikshuni Sui Miao, as unique as it seemed to me, was not at all that special or unusual. For example, Bhikshuni Jingru met Bhikshuni Sui Miao in Malaysia. Over 3 consecutive days, their eyes briefly met without any verbal exchanges. As Bhikshuni Suimyo passed by the room in which Upasika Jingru folded sun-dried clothes, they had their first verbal exchange the 3rd time they met, just before Bhikshuni Suimyo was ready to return to Manila. In that exchange, Bhikshuni Suimyo asked Jingru whether she would like to become a nun. And Jingru nodded. The next time they met was the tonsure ceremony in Manila that Bhikshuni Suimyo arranged for her. There were also times when Bhikshuni Suimyo was reported to speak a lot. Bhikshuni Yingjue told me that one afternoon, Bhikshuni Suimyo dragged her aside and talked to her for hours, although she did not understand much of what Bhikshuni Suimyo said. But at the end of the conversation, Yingjue had determined to become a nun. Such is the amazing power of the language of compassion. It is this language that attracted people together at Ifu Temple in Hawaii. Every Sunday, people speaking many different languages gather at this temple to chant the name of Amitabha Buddha, to listen to a short Dharma talk by Bhikshuni Suimyo or teachers invited by her, and to enjoy a sumptuous fusion vegetarian lunch. Much of the time, these gatherings proceed without much verbal communication, but with many smiles and much good cheer. Like Bhikshuni Hyuwan, Bhikshuni Suimyo was quite conscious of her accented speech. As a Dharma teacher, she felt somewhat self-conscious of her language limitations. As a result, she opened her temple to all and did whatever she could to ensure that the Dharma teachings were available to anyone who appeared. Not only was Yukfu Temple open to Dharma teachers and practitioners from all places and traditions, but the temple also provided all sorts of Dharma teachings in the form of books, videotapes, and audio tapes that were available for anyone to check out, to read, and to watch at home. Bhikshuni Suimyo welcomed and helped anyone who wished to study and propagate the Dharma, regardless of religious tradition, sect, or nationality. Her generosity in facilitating the learning process was well known. Through her, many young and talented Buddhists furthered their understanding and practice of the teachings, and many different Buddhist groups gained wonderful new members. Bhikshuni Suimyo received many Dharma leaders from various traditions at Yukfu Temple, including the 16th Karmapa, Master Xuanhua from the City of 10,000 Cities. I'll have quick, okay? She received so many different friends from Taiwan. Whenever I spoke of her, friends just remember her. All right, now I'll go to the conclusion. Throughout history, there has been a tradition of brave Buddhist women pioneers crossing borders, breaking through boundaries, and establishing new territories. This tradition begins with the legacy of Mahaprajapati, who walked together with 500 noble women beyond the boundaries of the palace to follow the Buddha's path. Time and again, we see Buddhist women continuing this dissident tradition despite innumerable obstacles that they must overcome on the way. Imagine the troubles of Princess Sanghamitra, who made her way from India to the beautiful Isle of Lanka, carrying with her a sapling from the Bodhi tree to transmit the Bhikkhuni lineage to the women. Imagine the groups of bhikkhunis who traveled for 2 years by sea all the way from Sri Lanka to China back in the 5th century CE to pass on the bhikkhuni lineage to their Chinese sisters at the end of the ocean. In the 20th and 21st centuries, we again witness eminent Buddhist women pioneers flying beyond borders and starting brand new Buddhist communities outside their homelands, even when they may not speak the local language well and may literally have to start everything from scratch. They appear unstoppable. Following in their footsteps of Bhikkhuni Hyuwan, all of us can certainly learn to practice speaking with prajna awareness, making sure that all words are genuine, meaningful, and true to the Dharma. Taking guidance from Bhikshuni Suimyo, all of us can begin speaking the universal language compassion, making sure that our words help dispel fear and encouraging others on the path to happiness. Although these two eminent Buddhist women have left this contaminated world behind, their spirit and legacies remain with us, inspiring and encouraging us always to go beyond borders and never limit ourselves to our own familiar worlds. Thank you.
Thank you, Christy. Thank you. Thank you. Discussion topics? Yes. Now we will have a discussion topic, Envision, Imagine, and Illustrate, an ideal Buddhist women's education. We will have discussion groups. And before we get to that, I want to make a few announcements. If anyone has reimbursement questions, please go at 11:30 to the main office. If you have questions about reimbursement, please go to 11:30 in the main office. Also, we found a cell phone. Did anyone lose their cell phone? Please see Venerable Hui. And also, for those of you who attended the Malaysian Sakyadhita conference, you can pick up your conference books at the registration desk. They're all ready for you, the proceedings. All international participants. The proceedings of the Malaysian Sakyadhita conference are available at the registration desk. Thank you. And thank you to all our wonderful panelists this morning. And thank you all for being patient. Thank you. Thank you.